Hello, it's me, Chris. I am here with Wyatt Claypool from the National Telegraph. Tell us about yourself, Wyatt.
Well, I run the National Telegraph because of Bill C-18. I now make mostly videos because you can't really get anything distributed these days. And I actually asked to come on your podcast. Well, one, because our channels kind of both explode at the same time, so that's when I started noticing you far more. And then two, because you get to talk about polls all day long, and that's kind of one of my favorite topics. And so this allows me to, move gratuitous polling videos off of my channel and moving them towards your channel.
I do talk a lot about polls. That's like half the channel.
Yeah, I guess if I'm also to add something else about myself, we mostly do like a lot of investigative work at the National Telegraph in terms of bureaucratic and political corruption, and then a lot of commentary stuff because independent media don't have a big budget to do constant innovative work. So
Hmm.
a lot of my stuff these days are just slowly watching the decline of Justin Trudeau and trying to explain why I think he's actually kind of falling apart these days. Where obviously like, oh, he sucks, that's why he's declining, but this is why I like channels like yours where you actually explain why, other people are suddenly realizing that they don't like him anymore.
Okay, so where do we want to begin here? What is the first topic you have in mind here?
Well, I wanted to talk about the recent Abacus data polls and the Main Street polls just simply because like it's been such an explosive rise for the Conservatives over the past month, like something that I don't think any of us really expected to see uh, take place this quickly. But it's been quite incredible to see that the Conservatives first jump up to just being above the Liberals by 9 points, then 10 points, and that's what we all thought were outliers at the time. And now we're up to 12 and 13 points with these new polls. And what I think that we've thought a scene over the past month is that there's a lot of those sort of fence sitter type Canadian voters who have either moved decisively into the I don't know category in terms of the liberal base, or they've moved toward the conservatives, or they're real, as I've been saying, or they're not voting.
Hmm.
So maybe if we start off with the Abacus data numbers, I think that a lot of people just look at the polling numbers and they don't really quite absorb just how often these sorts of polls can like demonstrate the rot within the Liberal Party and just sort of how although I attribute a lot of this to the health of the Conservative Party at the moment, I also think most of this is just more of an anti-liberal kind of a shift that's taking place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to picture it. So if we have the Abacus data poll and the headlines here. So we have Conservatives at 38, Liberals at 26, NDP at 19, Bloc at 7, Peoples and Green at 4. So naturally, some people will look at this poll, and as Wyatt is saying, they will glean that, oh, the Conservatives are gaining ground. They're taking liberal voters. That's a very common rhetoric you see from politicos or from TV news or something like that. That's not necessarily true. Now, it could very well be true. The Conservatives are gaining voters from the Liberals. But it could also easily be the case that you can't tell from this poll and this format of it with just these headlines. The Liberals could be leaving the electorate and the Conservatives could be putting new people into the electorate. Because in general, we only have about 2/3 of Canadians ever vote in an election these days. So there's plenty of people who exist in Canada who can vote who don't.
And I think what you also end up seeing in the Main Street poll that sort of demonstrates this is that when you have these, or I think they also might be abacus, but when you have voters who, like the I don't know category in a lot of these recent polls has grown a lot. So it might also just be that conservatives' base has grown a little bit, but it's more so that the proportion of decided voters has drastically grown over the past few months, whereas a lot of liberal voters have shifted into that I don't know category that's kind of suppressing their turnout. So the liberals do have the ability to bounce back in a certain sense from these lower numbers. At the same time, yeah, like you can see it right there on screen. When you have 12% undecided, that's actually quite a bit considering how
Hmm.
stark the differences are between the CPC and liberals are these days. You'd usually consider like an I don't know a race with like a lot of unknowns, like people don't like the parties maybe are still need to flesh out their positions on certain policies, or people don't really know the leaders well enough, and maybe that's sort of true still for pure Polyev. But right now, usually if you like Trudeau, you're pretty much decided on him. So I don't even see really the undecided coming back liberal. I think it's more so the sort of toss up between NDP, Green, and Liberal or staying home that's sort of winning the day in terms of for the Conservatives.
Yeah, I think it's Usually, now the there's all sorts of debate in this in modeling circles about how you consider the undecideds. But usually the default assumption is they'd go to everyone proportionally. But I definitely do agree with you here, Wyatt. I don't think it's accurate to say a lot of these undecideds are likely to swing back liberal. I think there is the capacity for that to happen if the liberals start fixing some of the core problems that are dragging them down. But until that happens, I don't really see them going back. We could easily see this 24% as probably their soft floor. They might go lower, but I think it's probably not super likely with Trudeau. But I also don't really see them going much higher unless some of these core issues like crime or drugs or housing start getting positive results to them. And that's
And this is what I mentioned in my recent video, and this is where I think that you find Justin Trudeau, because even though I am very much a conservative person, I always like to sort of look at everything from a sympathetic lens, in terms of the sort of party that I'm talking about. And so what you see right now with Justin Trudeau is he's in this between this rock and a hard place where to admit to making mistakes and saying, but here's what we're going to do to change things, could actually have the party start to bring back that undecided voter base. At the same time, you could see there being a lot of outrage among sort of the orange liberal base, the I stand with Trudeau crowd on Twitter, if they actually start trying to make fundamental changes, because I think those people will kind of end up, facing a bit of an identity crisis if effectively the parties are going to have to tell them, like, you've actually been basically completely wrong about the policy outcomes that we've been generating over the past 3 years. Yeah, we actually did mess up, and you've kind of looked a little bit silly defending us. So, and also that base of people is what keeps Justin Trudeau very healthy in terms of like at party AGMs. Like if he ever admitted to making mistakes, I think that's when the Chrétien liberals could kind of come back and decide whether they want to remove him as a leader or at least really shake up his PMO and basically say, okay, you can remain the leader, but we get to control who's going to be in your cabinet and who's going to be in the prime minister's office because we do not really trust your advisors at all these days. And another thing that I think what you end up happening with these undecided voters as well is that this is more so in the Main Street poll here is that you're actually not seeing them being able to decisively choose between the NDP and the Liberals, and I think it's because the NDP, which usually siphons off any voters that the Liberals lose, are not actually considered different enough from the Liberals in order to pick anything up.
yeah. So what seems to be happening here for the NDP specifically is it's a phenomenon we see basically in every single multi-party democracy where you have a lesser party that's barely holding up the larger one into competence in government, and they get all of the negatives for doing it. They get all the hits. Everyone who's unhappy with the government blames them, but they get none of the upsides because any good thing that happens is really it's the bigger party's responsibility. They have all the votes. The smaller party can't actually force it through. And we see this a lot. The FDP in Germany's had experiences several times. The Liberal Democrats in the UK famously experienced this in 2010 to 2015 when they
Also,
backed.
the Democratic Unionists from Northern Ireland.
Yes,
They
them too.
got all the blame for Brexit.
Yep. Especially because it turned out pretty poorly for Northern Ireland. So you see this quite regularly that the smaller party gets crushed. And it really makes you wonder what Singh and his advisors were thinking when they signed on to this. Because at the end of the day, they're probably going to get absolutely crushed in the next election, barring some crazy decisions made by Singh that no one else is expecting him to make. Not even NDP voters are expecting this. Barring something crazy, he's going to probably lose most of his caucus. And at the end of the day, what has he gotten so far? A mediocre dental plan, which is basically just we're going to send checks to people below a certain income level.
And here's the thing too. This is where they're never going to pick up liberal voters, is because the NDPs, like them trying to champion this dental plan as being partially their doing. It really wasn't because the liberals had been campaigning on a dental plan for a while now. Maybe they emphasized it a little bit more or less at different times, or maybe they said, well, we'll look into it, or maybe in certain elections they said we're definitely going to do it. But this was never shocking to liberal voters that the government that they voted for was eventually going to pass universal dental. So there wasn't going to be any liberals saying, yeah, I really like that the NDP forced that legislation through. So I'm going to go vote NDP because I think they're delivering the things I like most in government. They have nothing to gain
Mhm.
because everyone was kind of already on board in terms of all the left wing parties. They're all on board with that plan in the first place. I think even the Bloc partially voted for it, so it didn't even matter.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes into that too, which links back to Trudeau's orange lib base, is as you were saying, the Trudeau's core base in the Liberals is the socially liberal, or yeah, the social liberal ideologically, not necessarily politically. So like, anyways, the left wing of the Liberal Party is Trudeau's core base, but those are also the people that the NDP can expand into. Where the Liberals are losing people is not in that core, like center left wing part of the Liberal Party, which is why the NDP is failing to grow because that's Trudeau's core base. And all Singh is doing the same thing Trudeau's doing, policy wise, and actual laws being passed. But also, he's attacking Trudeau for everything else, which alienates these people that he could grow into. Because the people he can grow into are the people who love Trudeau. So
Yeah,
it's.
and this is where my theory on Jagmeet Singh is not that because everyone has this idea that he's just sticking around long enough to be able to get a pension and then he's gonna skedaddle. I really don't see that with Singh. I think ever he's going to leave before call an election
Sorry, just one second here. Your audio is
being
getting all
around.
funky.
Oh, sorry. Is that a bit better?
It sounds better for now. It was like cutting out before.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so one of the things with Jagmeet Singh that I detect is that when you look at all of his social media activity, the fact that he does a lot on TikTok and that he does live streams with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar from the U.S., I think the guy just genuinely loves the public spotlight. The guy could make way more as a lawyer, which is what he's like, which is what his profession is, than being a politician, even being a political party leader. He could make way more as a lawyer. But I think that the guy just simply likes not even being significant in terms of like the political developments. I think he just likes kind of being in the photo of who was there when everything was happening and kind of being someone that everyone can like stand for on Twitter. But he's never actually going to be someone like he's not someone who's actually action oriented, and he's also not someone I consider exactly greedy in any way. I think he just genuinely likes being around. And so like the thing is he's very good at making himself publicly known. So that's where the NDP is also in the same position as the Liberals, where their leaders almost become too iconic to just suddenly dump. So that they're going to probably have to wait until he causes such a big upset for the NDP that he's forced to resign himself or he loses his seat.
Well, both of those things seem very possible right now. If you ran when I ran these numbers into my model, which in the future, I'm not sure if this is going to be this week or the next week. I'm going to have an actual video on that for listeners who are interested. But when I ran through the model, it was not looking good for Singh himself politically. He was on the cusp or losing his seat. I don't recall which off the top of my head, but it was pretty close for him to actually
And, and
lose.
and that's the problem for the NDP and the Liberals is that even what could be considered a safe seat for them is not in any ways what is considered a safe seat for the Conservatives. A safe seat for the Conservatives is like, Slave Lake area. They win it by dictatorship numbers. It's literally 90% of the voters in that election vote for either the Conservatives or the PPC, where a safe seat for a lot of Liberal and NDP politicians is a three-way split, but they think will always reliably go their way. So, like where a Liberal is winning with 36% of the vote, that's considered a fairly decently safe Liberal seat. But it's because the Conservatives win 30% and the NDP wins like 26 or something like that, and then it gets cut up a few other ways with some other candidates, or like the Liberals are sub 40, like they're barely on 40. That's considered a decently safe seat in the GTA for the Liberals and in Vancouver for the NDP. So like yeah, like just with even just like the smallest change in a news cycle, a lot of those seats can cause disasters. That's where I think the Liberals are actually fairly willing to kick out bad candidates like that real estate scam artist back in the 2021 election. Because if you run a guy like that in Vancouver, you could see just a 4 point shift from the Liberals to the NDP, just shredding the Liberal seat outcomes in that city.
Which is actually kind of the remarkable thing. You touched on this earlier, but the remarkable thing we're seeing right now in the current polling, we have like the Main Street numbers here, we have these Abacus numbers over here. There is no real movement towards the NDP or the Green or the Liberals. All three parties are pretty low. Yeah, sure, the Greens up about 2 points, but in the Abacus poll here. But the Liberals are down 7. The NDP are up 1. The Greens are up 2. So there's 4 points of left-wing voters in Canada who've just evaporated. And I don't think they've moved conservative. I think they've just left the electorate, which is quite remarkable.
And that's the thing, is that I think a lot of the 2015 Liberal voters were moderates who liked they liked the positivity of Justin Trudeau's message, and it seemed like it contrasted well from Mulcair and Harper. At the same time, I think they actually did like the idea of the deficit spending investment plans. So when the investments effectively panned out to be worthless, and that the Canadian economy has not grown at all, it's only grown insofar as that if you keep adding people through immigration to the economy who are being productive, that yes, the economy will grow, but per capita it's shrunk quite a bit, or like significantly. We're effectively in a recession at this point, and I think a lot of those people, that they were not the socially liberal voters who are ride or die with Justin Trudeau, but they're also not the type of people who they're not really like the conservative economic voters. They're kind of like these like community kind of voters. Like they like community investment. They like, they're the type of people who show up in a municipal election when a municipal candidate proposes, expanding the transit system or something like that, because it's a great investment in the city. And so I think when a lot of the government spending went nowhere, these people kind of left. But they're also not the sort of voters who will vote for like spending cuts either.
Which kind of goes on what I find quite interesting, especially when you from pretty much every other person meaningfully talking about politics. Not everybody, obviously. You can probably find some people in the political sphere, especially on the internet more so than TV news, that get this right. But a lot of people have this weird idea that an election, like in Canada right now, is there's this liberal conservative swing voter, and who they decide to vote for determines the election.
Oh, no, I saw that tweet that you put out a few minutes before we started recording this. No, you're 100% right. It's always like, it almost becomes like fetishistic about these sort of voters in the middle, and, well, what kind of exact platform do they want? It's this sort of voter that Aaron O'Toole based his entire general election campaign around in 2021, that if we just take a little bit of an environmental policy, we take a little bit of a good, efficient economic management policy over here, we give a little bit of a leeway to gun owners, but we still say that gun violence is bad, and we need stronger gun control, that you can kind of piece together this perfect platform that those people will like just be absolutely in love with you over, and they'll like run out of their houses to vote for you because of your policy nuance. It's like I think that voter is like that voter myth exists because I think there's a lot of people, especially on television, who love they love they love wonkish politics and policy, and they want to pretend that voters care about that stuff too, when at the end of the day voters just care about competence in terms of the vast majority of voters.
Yeah, I would say there's probably, let's say, 3 main groups of voters. So you have your ideological people who are never going to be swayed. They're going to vote for the person they think is their most closely ideological person that they trust. So you'll probably never get... You could run Trudeau as under the conservative brand. You probably won't get the Trudeauite socially liberal voters voting for him because they don't trust the conservative brand. But if you put Trudeau in front of the liberal brand, yeah, they 100% trust that, and they'll vote for it 100% of the time. That's group 1. Then you have group 2, which are like, this is not going to sound very nice, but they're basically vibes-based voters. They vote on who they feel is the best. Not any particular policy, not any specific reason. It's just like, I like Trudeau, I'm going to vote for him. Or I like Danielle Smith, I'm going to vote for her. No other reason. And then the final group is you're voting for one issue. One. For example, my fiance's father-in-law, sorry, that'd be my dad, wrong person. My fiance's father is a union guy. He works in a union. He is otherwise staunchly conservative on every cultural issue, but he doesn't trust the conservatives on unions specifically, so he'll never vote for conservatives. Even though every other voting issue he supports the conservatives, just specifically not unions.
I think your father, or your father-in-law. What was it? What was it?
My fiance's father.
Fiance's father. So your almost father-in-law. But that lines up with a lot of people I know, and this
Yeah.
is why I think that you're going to see the NDP vote collapse in the 2025 election, is because the NDP's always had this weird relationship between having kind of college campus student union type voters and then having the very blue collar people who will want a party that's basically just the union party. And the thing is, as they plunge further and further into socially progressive, woke kind of politics, I think that they've been making themselves more of a college town party, and they've been alienating a lot of the union guys. And this is why we start to see, and it's not in these Abacus or Main Street polling results, but we start to see polling companies coming out with results showing that union members are actually shifting towards the Conservatives. And I think it's just the attitude that they're voting for at this point. I think that they're almost dropping whether or not the party's pro-union. They're just voting because they don't think that because they don't think the Conservatives like fundamentally disrespect them as people.
That's almost the exact position my fiance's father's in. He's not gonna vote. He's not voted NDP since Singh because he feels Singh is too socially liberal. Basically, he doesn't like that, so he's not voting NDP anymore. He voted Trudeau in 2021, but he wasn't very happy about it. And now he's probably either not going to vote or hold his nose and vote Poilievre because he's mad at Trudeau now and Singh still.
Yeah. And I think these especially the Abacus data poll, I think that proves out that, especially in the Atlantic areas, I think the type of voter who's shifting towards the Conservatives are the socially conservative voters
Mm.
who got sort of tired with trying to follow the labor politics inside the Liberals and the NDP because it just wasn't panning out for them because all the negatives were outweighing what they thought the benefits were. So that's where you see in the Abacus polls that like now the Conservatives have like a 38, I think it was like they're at 38% in the Atlantic regions, which is pretty crazy. That's literally at their national average.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly 38%. And I think that's mostly off the back of kind of movements that Blaine Higgs is tapping into, where Blaine Higgs, when you see the recent New Brunswick polling, should probably be nowhere close to winning, considering how unpopular he was about a few months ago, as well as how unpopular his government is. But he's only within 3% in New Brunswick, which is eminently winnable for them, especially because the People's Alliance voters have all joined with the PCs at this point.
Yeah, what I think is, wait, you hit something on the nail. Head on the whoa phrasing. You hit it on the nail, the head on the nail right there. What a lot of I find party people, not even commentators, specifically party people, get wrong is they think voters across the board are fairly moderate on social issues or lean left. And yes, there's absolutely tons of people in that category on social issues. The issue is, when you only look at it like that, is if you are trying to run the Conservative Party, you are going to fail. Because no one trusts a conservative brand for socially liberal issues. So you're not going to get those socially liberal voters to come vote for you. Maybe here and there you might get some of them, but not reliably. You're not going to get enough to win an election. What you need to do, what you need to focus on, for two reasons. First, to actually get votes. And second, for volunteering and fundraising, is you have to give the people who are remotely interested in you, in the case of the Conservative Party, would be the more socially conservative members of the public, something to trust. And that's where Poilievre is actually doing well in Atlantic Canada. And I'm actually doing some work on this in the background, but I'm not quite done it yet. But the gist is, Atlantic Canada is a lot more socially conservative than people give it credit for. I mean, Nova Scotia only legalized Sunday shopping by court order, effectively, because they did some weird, silly, esoteric laws that they didn't want to repeal. So they were forced to legalize it. But a referendum here in 2005, the population did not want it. They did not want Sunday shopping as like one particular issue. The local population out here isn't socially liberal. Politicians pretend it is, but it's not. But if you campaign as the National Conservative brand, as a moderate or squishy middle like Aaron O'Toole did, you're not going to get the arch social conservative voter in Atlantic Canada to come vote for you. Because the other thing that people forget, Atlantic Canada, party people, is a lot of Atlantic Canada, especially rural Atlantic Canada, are very community-focused voters, as the kind of person that Wyatt was describing earlier. They want to vote for things to help the community. They are very community orientated. They tend to skew more centrist or center left on economics. So they're not going to vote for the Conservative Party nationally for economic issues usually. At least you're not going to get enough to wipe out, like get 30-40% of the vote. You probably can get like high 20s focusing just on fiscally conservative people. You're not going to get more than that. And that's where O'Toole kind of failed upwards. He only succeeded here because, in Nova Scotia specifically, such as in South Shore St. Margaret's, because the Liberal candidate decided to just call all of the lobster fishermen racist. For those
Wasn't one
not
of the
very
Liberal candidate, what wasn't Monsef also a Nova Scotia politician?
No, I think she was in Ontario.
Ontario. Oh, okay, there was someone else. No, it was the Green Party lady who
Yeah.
jumped Liberal, and I
Yeah.
think she brought the anti-Semitism with her.
Yes, she's from New Brunswick, yeah. But I can't think of her name now, the cabinet minister from South Shore St. Margaret's, like, what a dumb idea. If you ever look into the counties of Nova Scotia, there's one county in southeast Nova Scotia on the South Shore called Shelburne County. It was a three-way tie county in 2019. Because she managed to piss off Shelburne County specifically, I mean the whole South Shore, but Shelburne County specifically so much, it went from being like 30% conservative to 70%. And turnout went up. Turns out, when one of your largest voter bases, or voter pools in a riding is lobster fishermen, calling them racist is not a very good strategy.
And to follow up on your thing about just how socially conservative a lot of Atlantic Canada is, there's a reason why, like, effectively New Brunswick is the one province in the country where abortion is effectively banned because no doctor will provide it. When even medical professionals have a socially conservative bent to them or fear the culture in the area that they do not want to step over that line, that's an area where you know that even if those people who are the hardcores that end up keeping society kind of in this nice socially conservative stasis, that the thing is, if they're only 40% of the population that you get the moderates in the middle, then you get your socially left people. What's the point of trying to, just because it's technically less than half, ignoring those people? Because this is where I saw the issue with Aaron O'Toole, is that he very much bought into the idea that if you take polling on an issue and you see that 60% of Canadians are on one side and 40% are on the other, you always go for the 60, not realizing the 60 is already cut up fairly decisively by the Liberals, NDP, Greens, and Bloc. Whereas that you should be trying to monopolize groups of voters who have been disenfranchised. Whereas the Aaron O'Toole bought into the idea that if somehow he can be the perfect guy, he can win basically on every single issue because people who are deeply into reading the platforms will shift towards him because of how brilliant he is at writing, like at nuanced public policy. And it's just not how it goes. And voters, like we were saying, they're very lopsided. You're never just like, a liberal voter is not the same everywhere you go. A liberal voter, like you said, in the Maritimes, and this is why you still get a few pro-life liberal MPs, is that they are socially conservative people who because they live in insular, smaller communities, tend to have more center-left economics. It's not like someone who's rural in Alberta who, like, they have a farm and they have to drive 5 minutes before they reach the next person. That person's far more likely to be a libertarian because they basically already live as a libertarian. Whereas these smaller fishing communities, you know a lot of people and you have to live quite close to people, so you tend to get that more community oriented view. It's like a very funny place in Canada is Vancouver Island. I would call it it's very granola voters, like, obviously, but you get Green Party type people out there. At the same time, people are actually kind of, not to be insulting, but they're very rural when you talk to the people out there. So like you would think that these should be right up the Conservative Party's alley in the sense that it's very much kind of small town values, but at the same time that they support like drug decriminalization because they like kind of naturalistic type solutions to things. Whereas if you go to another rural area, they're very much they're very much the type of person who's going to drive you out of town if you try and put up a safe injection site.
It's an interesting thing there because what O'Toole's big mistake was, and you kind of touch on this, but I'm going to expand a bit, is he how do I phrase this? He took people and he assumed that people losslessly engage with issues. I.e., if I am if I want fiscal discipline, I'm going to win the fiscal discipline guy, even if I want to do something on climate change. But that's actually not how this works. There's, generally speaking, people who care about policy, which, as we've already discussed previously, is not that many people, but of the people who care about policy, they usually don't equally care about all policies. You can probably have people, I'll say such as myself, who think, yeah, we probably do need to do, like, have some action of some kind on environment issues. But that doesn't mean you go out and you change, that you could say, oh, we're going to have a carbon tax and we're going to happily win over my vote. You're not. Because I don't think that's the appropriate action. I don't like it. And Aaron O'Toole and other people like that, and a lot of people I find in leadership positions in conservative parties, not just the national one, but provincial ones too, is they have this idea that you can split the goose. You can talk out of both sides of your mouth on issues, when in reality you really need to have a more coherent platform and focus on just your core things, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing Poilievre with 12-point leads right now. Poilievre, when he stumps around, when he does a rally somewhere, when he makes a video for his social media, he's going to talk about one of four things: inflation, housing prices, drugs, or crime. Those are the only four things he talks about, nothing else. Everything goes back into those four things. And that actually works really well, because then people who care about those four things know that's all Poilievre cares about. So if I vote for him, I'm very likely to get that. Whereas if you have someone like O'Toole, who has a 50-page platform and has 80 different policies, voters are aware and are pretty smart in a lot of ways that politicians can't actually achieve everything they say they're going to do. Even if they're well-intentioned, there's just not enough time. And there's always difficulties and always things that pop up that they don't expect. So if they promise 80 billion things, you don't actually know which things they're going to do, what things they're focused on. Do they care? Does Aaron O'Toole care as much about climate change as he does the budget, as he does the military, as he does being a hawk? Who knows? No one knows. Does Aaron O'Toole know? I don't think he does either. Poilievre?
And the thing is that you only have so much political capital, and especially the amount of attention you have and the amount of credibility voters think you have tends to determine how much political capital you have to spend. So as the Conservatives, you are one of the biggest parties, so you can talk on more issues than the NDP or the Greens could in order to win people over and not have people sort of think you're all over the place. But you also have to expend a certain amount of political capital to make people take you seriously on an issue and to be able to win voters in that area. So if we go into the climate change issue, in which it showed that, like, in the New Nanos poll, it shows like 15% of people care about it. I don't think it's nearly as much as that in terms of how people are being serious with themselves. But if you're trying to win that climate change voter, the amount of political capital a conservative has to spend, the amount of time and attention and effort, is far greater than the NDP, Greens, or Liberals. So why are you going to get in on effectively betting against all these other parties who have a far greater pool of voters when you could just stick to the issues that they have to expend more political capital, make people take themselves seriously on? This is where you want to be shifting Justin Trudeau towards economics, towards crime, because the thing is, he has lowered his credibility on that issue, so the amount he has to expend in order to keep voters on his side and win new voters is incredibly high. And I think really all he can do these days is just hold on to people. And maybe this is a great way to almost a moment to shift over to to things like the People's Party and the Green Party, is that those parties, and this is where I think that the Green Party's actually been able to win seats and the People's Party have not, is that the Green Party is very focused on things at once. Obviously, just from the name, they're very much the environmentalist party, that they'll basically say, yeah, whatever the NDP said, plus 10% of spending. But most of their stuff is environmentalism and opposing, like, the oil and gas industry and standing up for climate change and whatnot. Whereas the People's Party tries to talk about every issue. They try to have a position on everything, and they're tweeting about it all day long. And where you're gonna develop a hardcore fan base who really likes their positions, but the average Canadian voter couldn't describe to you what the People's Party believes.
just as an anecdotal point on that is, I have a lot of my friends who are, they're not super politically active, but they're fairly politically active. They're more politically active than probably the average person of around 25. None of them have any idea what the PPC is. All they know is that they're quote unquote far right. And nothing the PPC's rhetoric or messaging does really moves the needle on that, because they don't spend enough political capital on any particular issue to have that be the issue that defines the party to people's minds. It's easy to understand that the Greens are the Environment Party, the NDP is the Union Party, the Liberals are the mushy middle party. What are the People's Party? A wonk can tell you what it is. The average Joe can't.
And that's where the People's Party benefited a lot in the 2021 election by talking about COVID a lot. So that's where I think they got a lot of their growth, was a lot of anti-COVID voters, but also was probably a lot of disaffected conservatives just basically indicating how much they didn't like the direction of the Conservative Party with O'Toole. But in 2019, the year that Bernier had the most to gain by winning his re-election in Beauce, he was not only not focused on actually being present in the riding to be able to win it, because it really does matter to voters, especially when you're the long-time incumbent, that you just suddenly run off and you don't actually care about running for your re-election. Like he lost by like 8 points, which is not much considering how little effort he actually put into the area. But in 2019, that was the moment where they had like the lowest ability, like they didn't break through at all, because you could like they basically talked about every single issue, and a lot of their issues were like really esoteric in a certain sense.
Hmm. Which,
Because as much as we want to think that, saying freedom is a fantastic platform and I'm pro freedom, that's too vague for people. Is that you have to specifically say what about it that you're in favor of.
hmm,
Whereas like that's where like the Greens are also not just in favor of environmentalism and trees. They are usually much more defining themselves in opposition to the oil and gas industry.
yes. And I think that mistake in 2019. I don't think it's going to be a fatal mistake for the PPC, but it definitely was a massive strategic blunder, which kind of boils down to either Bernier's fundamental unseriousness, which remains to be seen, or just a naivety of how politics works. You can't move the needle without effectively someone championing your party from the inside. No one has ever caused a revolution without the upper class being involved in it. Bernier, to make the People's Party really take off and really gain ground, needs to get an MP in Parliament. Doesn't matter who it is. He needs someone in Parliament, because as soon as one MP's in Parliament, it legitimizes your party to everybody. And the People's Party seems to be completely unfocused on this one thing. They're trying to win all of the conservative voters in the world right now, when they really should be specifically trying to win one riding and then go from there, which is actually kind of what the Green strategy has been thus far.
That drove me up the wall in terms of the Portage Lisgar situation with Bernier. Like I'd already written him off before this, more so because I could see a lot of these mistakes and unseriousness coming, like the continued unseriousness. But you're 100% right with the Greens. When Elizabeth May won her seat, the first Green seat ever won, they literally flew in not only every Green Party of Canada like full-time activist out to the riding in Vancouver Island, but they also had Green Party USA people fly out. It was nuts how many people are in the area. There was almost probably like, they probably almost grew the population of the riding by 10% by all the activists they flew in. But this is the thing with Beauce, and then this is the thing with Portage Lisgar. In Beauce, when he was trying to do like a mile a minute campaign all over Canada, which is like, dude, you're not going to be winning the popular vote in this one. That's why you do not do, you shouldn't be using tactics that are popular vote focused, but he should have been focused on Beauce. But in Portage Lisgar, the thing that annoys me is when they thought that when people say that he fought hard, everyone knew that Candace Bergen was going to step down for a long time. And then when she had stepped down, everyone knew there was going to be a by-election there pretty soon. And he basically only showed up to start campaigning that area, like basically a few days before the by-election date was called. That was like I think that was kind of like unforgivable in terms of
Mm.
how much money he takes in from his donors and how much money he actually specifically pays himself per year to not be there 6 months in advance, saying, "Hey guys, I'm actually going to live here. I'm dedicated to bringing like Portage Lisgar's community concerns to Parliament." If he did that, he actually could have gotten somewhat close. I think everyone just saw it as a traveling salesman showing up to their riding and saying that he was gonna represent them, and they're like, I don't care.
Now, yeah, the big issue he had there, well, one of them, you touched on a couple, obviously, but one of his big issues he had there too is I'm not from Portage Lisgar, obviously, but I know a lot of people in rural areas, a lot. In fact, you could even argue most of Nova Scotia is a rural area, surprisingly, right? Most rural areas are not happy about helicopter candidates. Now, you can move into a rural area, embed yourself in that community, and become a member of the community. But you don't do that in 3 weeks. If Bernier was really thinking after 2021 that, oh, I should head over to Portage Lisgar, a rural area, he really needed to embed himself in that community for as long as he could to build the trust that he's not just going to helicopter in and helicopter out. Which is why on the Greens, where they've actually had success isn't rural areas. It's places like Victoria suburbs or Kitchener or Fredericton. Cities. In cities, people are more willing to vote for someone who's only been there for a short period of time. And we actually saw this federally recently too, with the Conservative candidate in Oxford by-election who was also helicoptered in, and the Conservatives did really bad in that election for one of that being that reason. He was a helicoptered in candidate, and a lot of the locals were not very happy with that because it's a rural area.
And I think that one of the other issues that you end up having with with the PPC, especially Bernier, just to go back to the Portage Lisgar thing, is that like this is where imagistics really matter. And what's funny with a party that really is so focused on social media, image, and the idea, and sort of like kind of contrasting like the soy conservatives versus like the Chad PPC people, is that like Bernier did not do enough at all in any way to transform himself to being someone that a rural person could see eye to eye with. Like he frankly is a Montreal Ponce who showed up into Portage Lisgar still wearing the crazy shirts he wears everywhere, and it's like he has to realize this is a riding where someone's going to ask you what church you go to, and he can't answer that question. And just like with a lot of these other sort of rural areas, like where the PPC did really well, it was when they had business owners as their candidates, and it was when they had people who used to be like Wild Rose people back in the day as their candidates, like well-known community figures. And like he was very much running a campaign that you would do in like a Calgary suburb or something like that, which is funny because that's not what when the actual Heritage by-election came on. They did a very just pieced together fly-by-night campaign with a guy who has run several times for the PPC around Alberta, but was not even the guy from the last election. So they had the worst of both worlds. The guy was technically a helicopter candidate. They also did not throw. They actually seem to have a decent budget based on me driving around that riding and them having a lot of signs, but then they also just didn't have the door knocking efforts in order to like reach people who live in suburbs who don't usually follow politics as closely, but they will vote for the people that they are informed about. But yeah, like the Green Party has a very, very clear voter profile that they target. That's why all their gains have always been in these kind of suburban, not when I say suburban, but you know what I mean, like mid-sized
Yeah.
cities.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah.
mid-sized city is like it's really funny when you get to these smaller parties and you're trying to like whittle down what they appeal to. The Greens appeal to mid-sized cities like Kitchener. That is their kind of a place to win a seat. It's like a Victoria suburban area. It's somewhere else like I forget where their last other seat is, but it's like these kind of almost they're kind of like these middle ground kind of ridings where they don't really like the last lady in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, wherever, who had a seat for the Greens.
Mm-hmm.
That was like again like a mid-sized kind of small city where there's can be a lot of progressive politics because it's small enough that not enough people pay attention. So all the progressive local student union people tend to take over the city council.
Yeah. And I think that in a broader scheme kind of goes into the mistake that the PPC's making right now and O'Toole made before, and I would even argue Scheer made the same mistake in 2019, and you could even go as far as Harper made that mistake in 2015. is the failure to understand who your base is, who you're trying to win. There's this idea that some people have that you should try to win everybody. No, you shouldn't try to win everybody because that's impossible. It actually is not possible. There's no point in trying to win someone. You can't win. You have to figure out what you are as a person, and once you have who you are as a person, you have to figure out what policies you can convincingly sell. Then from there, you have to figure out who those policies appeal to, and then you have to craft a platform for those people. A lot of politicians kind of do this backwards. They try to look at what policies are popular, then they try to craft a voter coalition out of those popular policies, and they're like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna win. No, because you don't have the credibility to sell those policies. You don't have a coherent group of voters. It's.
And here's an. Oh.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, you also have the other issue with PPC, but you can probably continue on your point after, is that they're also really choosy of who they want their supporters to be, because usually in these upstart parties, you really want to tone down the eccentricities and the purity testing, because the PPC is the first one to throw out one of their own supporters, in the sense that if you don't line with them on every issue, they get very testy with whether or not you're really in favor of the party or not. Whereas like the Greens are never going to get on you about your opinions on certain. That's where the Greens actually almost destroyed themselves in 21, because they effectively tried to like persecute their own leader for being Jewish and not being anti-Israel. Whereas you kind of get the same thing, but every election that the PPC's been involved in so far, that if you're not like, a foreign policy isolationist, if you don't agree with them on vaccines, then you're going to get thrown out. This is where Bernier is especially vulnerable in the WEF question, because as silly as it is, I don't really care if he went back in 2008 or not. The problem is, to his audience, who is like, well, purity test conservatives to prove that they're all corrupt, is that Bernier, by his own standards, should be like tossed out as some sort of like phony or whatever. So they are constantly having to actually double down on how the purity testing in that party to prove that Bernier is actually way cooler than he ever imagined he was. And like it's like what I've said is like it's the party for guys who think beef jerky's a food group. It's the type of people who wear eccentric political message T-shirts when they go to events, and that they get politicians in trouble for taking photos with them. It's like that kind of person who's like the PPC voter, and it's because you have to kind of be like almost 110% in to be a real PPC supporter, or someone's going to chase you out.
And I think the reason why you see that particular combination is because Bernier in 2019, when he founded his party, didn't decide at the outset who he was targeting. He was basically saying, if I just be a populist, I will get the people. They will come to me. And that's never happened. There's no election you can ever point to where someone just asserted themselves and that's how they won. You have to target actual people. You got to go to a door, look at a person in the eye and be like, you're my voter, effectively. Figure out who that person is and do things to make them trust you. And the PPC really seems to fail at this basic thing. In the Portage-Lisgar by-election, Bernier was trying to come out to the rural religious population of Portage-Lisgar that I am actually a secret or a SOCON this entire time. You can trust me. And he's like, we're going to open the abortion debate. We're going to ban abortion at 24 weeks nationally. Ignoring the fact that in reality abortion is banned at 24 weeks nationally, and anyone who actually cares about the issue is aware of that. So you're coming in, your hot take is, I'm going to do the status quo. Great. Like what?
Also with your record too, is that you're having to you're basically like the sort of voters in Portage-Lisgar are the sort of people who like, and this is the thing with socially conservative people in general, especially in nomination races, you'll have a lot of this. If you say that you're socially conservative, they're gonna go check the Campaign Life Coalition's record on you, and when they give you a red light, they're gonna be like, oh, never mind, he's lying. Like a lot of the socially conservative voters, in a certain sense, because I think that they're always as a socially conservative voter myself, I think socially conservative voters get unfairly tarnished as somehow being like the low information voters somehow, even though they're literally some of the voters who are most likely to actually do their research on candidates and make sure they're on side. And this is kind of the problem. This is the thing with them is that with when you're a SoCon voter, you tend to be very wary if someone's trying to dupe you by pretending that they agree with your values to get into government, because that's happened with a lot of people. Like Aaron O'Toole technically used to be considered a pro-life MP, crazily enough. And that SoCon voters tend to actually be the people who will look into your record. So when I forget the Brandon Leslie, when he was going after Bernier on his record, I think that's what's going to get a lot of people who might have been considering going PPC to say, "Oh, never mind, he's just another one of those O'Toole type phonies." And that's kind of the funny thing is Bernier's way too pure to be a conservative. At the same time, he actually shares a lot of kind of opinion flip flops with O'Toole.
Yes, it's one of those really funny things about Bernier in particular. Is in PPC, the PPC iteration in 2019 was probably actually more true to Bernier's personality himself. It was a very much more of a libertarian party with a little bit populist anti-immigration sprinkled in. Not something that's entirely incoherent in itself. But because of COVID, and the way the party gained a lot of ground is by appealing to more socially conservative people who are upset about mask mandates and vaccines mandates and such. Bernier tried to pivot the PPC into this kind of like a clone of the Christian Heritage Party, but quote unquote more effective or more popular. But Bernier himself is a terrible mask bearer for that. Again, evidenced by his big hot take on legislating abortion being essentially codifying the de facto status quo. Because again, you go to pro-abortion sites, people who campaign for total abortion access, they will tell you you can't get an abortion past 23 weeks 6 days, and that's Quebec. That's the last you can get it in Canada. Now, provinces might pay for you to get it in the US, but they won't provide it in Canada because no doctor in Canada will provide it past that date. So if you say we're going to ban it at 24 weeks, it's like that's literally the law effect, or that's the de facto law.
And well, it's more of like it's more like the New Brunswick thing is that it's effectively banned in New Brunswick because no one will provide it. Like the actual state of the law is no law, so you could technically get whatever you want.
Yes,
which is what pro-life groups campaign against because they want far stricter regulations so that you can't just get whatever you want if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But because we don't have the crazy, I would say, pro-abortion culture of the U.S., where you gotta provide it up to the very last second before a child's born, or you're not pro-choice. That's where I think that in Canada, because we don't have that aggressive culture, that you have far more doctors willing to sort of throw up their hands and say, "I'm not doing this."
Which kind of shows the fundamental misunderstand. Like, as you were getting on, a lot of socially conservative voters are very well informed, and they are aware. A lot of them are aware, or they know people like the Campaign for Life Coalition who are aware of these things and would know immediately on seeing that pledge that this is mostly a ceremonial thing. Yeah, you banned abortion at 24 weeks federally. You just codified the status quo. Voters aren't aware of that. They will see this. And it betrays a fundamental unseriousness to the voter you're trying to win because you're not actually giving them anything. You are taking the safest, least controversial position you could take to try to win their vote when it doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah. Oh, and here's a great transition point I think we have right here. Because speaking of unserious voters, I think this is a great time to sort of talk about. This is why I think Justin Trudeau is in such trouble right now, because he has been basically enabling the most unserious type of voters in his base in order to effectively hold on to his power within the side of the Liberal Party. But these days, because he hasn't been actually going for those large swaths of middle-aged voters who want some actual who want some good content in terms of public policy and who don't want just social signaling, that he's effectively trapped himself into a small car with all of these voters who want him to talk endlessly about climate change and how Pierre Poilievre is exactly like Donald Trump or something like that.
Yeah, it's actually kind of, it's an amazing feat he's actually managed to trap himself into. He's taken the Liberals from being one of the broadest coalition parties, like it has the most accessible voters, to one of the narrowest in the country. I believe the recent Abacus data. Let's see if it's in this particular post.
And look at his popularity ratings here.
Yeah.
This is disgusting. This is like actually should make him like sick at night when he sees that like 29% of people like him. And this is where I like this rating system better than Main Streets, because they have like people who somewhat like you and somewhat dislike you. Really, at the end of the day, people have gut instincts. They just think I like him or I don't like him. That's really it. And then there's some undecided people who just simply don't care or don't know. If you have a leaning opinion, you pretty much like him, or if you have leaning approval or whatever. But 29% really represents that. That's probably right now the Liberal Party's ceiling. If they're really lucky, maybe they can dig out a couple of voters who don't quite like Trudeau, but they're somehow been convinced to be scared of Poilievre. But I think that what you're going to see now, and this is what I've been kind of saying for the last year or so, back when Trudeau in the 2021 election had that 38 or 35% approval rating around there, I'm not sure exactly, yeah, 39. Yeah, he's not going to win 39, but that's his ceiling. Right now, his ceiling is 29. And of course, as you go lower in your ceiling, you're mostly going to be kept to hardcores. And I think, like you said before, his hardcore base is probably about 24 and 25%. But he only has about like 4 or 5 points to potentially grow at this point, maybe 6 or 7 if he's lucky, and even that only puts him around 31% of the vote. And if the Conservatives are grabbing 38, I think if you ran, I guarantee if you run your numbers on the way you do your projections, the Conservatives would probably still be in a majority territory at that point.
What, 38 to 24?
Yeah, it's like 38 to 31.
Wait, sorry,
I'm saying like best case scenario.
Oh,
if
yeah.
the Liberals are able to overperform Justin Trudeau's bad popularity rating by 2% or so, they would still probably lose a 38 to 31 election. Don't scare me by saying they could win.
No. The Liberals can't win. I think the Conservatives would probably not get a majority in that case, but they definitely wouldn't. The Liberals can't win that. Let's see. So this is my August 27th numbers. Ignore the top one here. So that is 31.5 to 37. So if we add plus 1 point to the Conservatives here and remove a point from the Liberals there, that's also the wrong. Okay, so I don't have the seat projections. So you could probably get around 162 to 169 seats for the Conservatives, depending on exactly on voter efficiency and distribution. It wouldn't quite be majority at that. They really need about 8-point lead for majority, but.
Well, regardless, my point still stands. That's being generous to the Liberals, that they can somehow grab up 3% of Canadians who just don't like Justin Trudeau to show up. Because again, and the thing is, this is where, it doesn't really matter as much for the opposition leaders as saying, oh, well, doesn't that mean Poilievre's cap's only 34? Well, literally a full third of people effectively don't know who he is still. And opposition leaders often just have people who are in favor of the government automatically saying no to them. Whereas if you're an NDP voter, you might still say you like Trudeau, but even if you vote NDP.
The other thing worth noting, too, specifically with Poilievre's numbers here, so 34 to 35, you see this time and again with right-wingers. They always outperform their approval ratings, and it's hard to say why. It could possibly, this is my hypothesis on this, I think it's because the right, as of 2023, is more diverse than the left is ideologically. So you have like the stereotypical fiscally conservative, socially liberal voter, but also the fiscally liberal, socially conservative voter in the same tent. So the fiscal conservative, social liberal might like Poilievre, but the fiscal liberal, social conservative might dislike Poilievre, but they're still going to vote for him.
There's also more of a culture of being able to criticize your leaders. I find in the conservative parties, simply because they have more leadership reviews, they have more mechanisms to be able to levy sort of grievances you have. Whereas the liberals is like, you like them or you don't like them. You have to.
Yeah. The Conservative Party also does have the robust inner control mechanism, which if they didn't have, the party would explode, of basically any contentious social issue is a free vote. No other party has that. And I think that's one of the reasons why you can see this kind of divergence in. And an example recently in the Alberta election, Danielle Smith outrun her popularity by about 10 points in actual votes share. So it's less bad for a conservative to have mediocre approvals than it is for a liberal, because liberals tend to either fall in line or hate the person, whereas conservatives can disagree but still vote for somebody. As a particular anecdotal example, I'm not particularly enthused about Houston. I think he's not the worst premier in Nova Scotia, but not particularly enthused. I think he could do more things that I would like. But not to get into nitty gritty policy, but I'm still probably going to vote for him in 2025 or whatever it is. Because the opposition is worse. I would, if polled, I would say I disapprove of Houston, but I'm probably still also going to vote for Houston.
Yeah, yeah. But going back to the base that Justin Trudeau has cultivated, I think that one, his approval rating is proving that this I Stand with Trudeau crowd is probably around almost half of the voters he still has. Then you probably have a lot of immigrant type voters who have liked a lot of the liberal benefits and whatnot. But when I think that if you ever polled it with all of the top issues in a lot of the other polls done, I'm not sure if they did, I don't think they did top issues in Abacus, but in a lot of the top issues, all the issues that the liberals can lead in or they are close to leading in is all the issues that most people do not actually fundamentally care about, but it's turned into a party of people who have a little bit almost it's the funny thing is actually the liberal party tends to be the richer person party, the people with a lot of disposable income who can be able to pay, who can be able to afford to hold luxury beliefs, whereas the conservative party is actually kind of more of like the younger, more middle class voter these days. And you can see that from the demographics. They're winning 18 to 30-year-olds. They're winning the millennials. They're winning boomers. They're winning the 65 and overs. They're winning everyone. Whereas the liberals, they tend to be grabbing up only those who tend to be in a higher earning bracket in those areas. Or either people in very high earning brackets or recent immigrants in lower brackets, but they tend to like the overall they like the overall social security spending and a lot of the other economic benefits that the government puts out. But that's the thing, is that the Liberal Party does not connect with people anymore because most people do not connect with a 37-year-old like an unmarried 37-year-old man or woman who really cares about climate change
Hmm.
and also makes more than six figures.
What I think we kind of see, we all, this is not to slam Canadian pollsters because they're actually really solid on actual performance in the end of the day, like numbers matching reality. But the one weakness these pollsters have compared to, say, pollsters in the US, even though our pollsters are actually better than the US pollsters, but data wise, the US ones give us way better quality data across the board. Because one of the things you touched on there is the liberals do better among the rich. And an average person, might look at a poll and see the 100K plus income bracket, the conservatives outperform the liberals. But that's not nuanced enough. Because the upper middle class band of like 100,000 household income to 300,000, the conservatives probably dominate that, and that's most of the 100K plus bracket. But once you start getting 500 plus, as we see in the US, in almost every other country where we see data like this, and we almost certainly true in Canada, is you start looking at 500K plus household income, the liberals start winning again. Just how the liberals do the best with boomers. Same kind of thing. They win a certain type of voter that doesn't show up in the
And
aggregate.
and also just older voters in general tend to be
Mm.
richer voters. Like obviously, that's where whenever you see a lot of stuff about racial income inequality in the U.S., it's actually a lot of nonsense because it just turns out that a lot of like Black Americans are like legitimately median age is like 15 years younger than the average white person. So like obviously you're gonna have like richer white people overall. So that always exasperates like income inequality type metrics. But yeah, like and the thing is that especially when you start to look at regional and wealth-based stuff, I guarantee you, if we did this, you would see a lot of rich people around the GTA and Montreal. That is really the base of the Liberal Party. The people who are making more than $500,000 a year, and they live in particularly geographically isolated bubbles. That's
Mm.
whereas like where a conservative rich person is more likely to be someone who makes over $100,000 and they have an acreage in Alberta because farmers actually tend to be fairly wealthy, although their costs are fairly high as well. So that kind of skews what their income is actually at the end of the day. But a lot of the the rich. It's the Laurentian or elite stereotype, but as people who live on the St. Lawrence River, they have a lot of expendable income, and they tend to be professionals. They're not usually business owners, which is why I find that they tend to be fairly disconnected from regulatory policy and how it affects businesses.
Yeah, just anecdotally to comment on that. There's a website you can go on called Riding Builders from election published from an election atlas, and it has the all the precincts in Canada, and you can look at how they voted in the last two elections. And if you zoom around the GTA here, actually, let's see if I can pull this up. Here we go. Just so happened to have a window of it open because that's
I'm opening this up too right now because actually this might help me.
And if you go on this, can we see this here? Perfect. We can see this here. And we open up the Ontario map, and we put on block details, and we show who's won things federally. And you zoom into Toronto. You can see here, this band roughly right here in the inner core of Toronto is like the richest part of Toronto. And yes, there's blue in it. You can see blue in it, obviously. That means the Conservatives won these precincts, for example. But these aren't overwhelming wins on these precincts. Like this one here in, I think this is Eagleton, St. Lawrence. It's 49 to 42% of the vote in that precinct. And then the one beside it is 49-30. So in some of the richer parts of the GTA, roughly this region, it's not an exhaustive one. And if you go outside over here, this is also pretty wealthy too. It's pretty mixed. If the Conservatives are winning the rich voters, this should be mostly blue. These should be ridings the Conservatives are winning, but they generally don't. Whereas if you look at ridings where they are absolutely crushing it, or precincts like, let's over here, Hanover in the edge of, what is this, Bruce Gray? Yeah. Like they crushed over here. But this is almost certainly, at best, lower middle class, if not actually poor, because a lot of I won't say specifically for Ontario, but I know in Nova Scotia, most rural areas are really poor relative to the province average. So you kind of get this skew on this. Now, a lot of these voters might be farmers, so they might actually have a lot of dollar value worth of wealth, but that doesn't mean they have a lot of dollar value real income, as Wyatt was touching on there.
And this goes back to that not only are you not your base shrinking with the Liberals, but the voters that you are trying to appeal to are themselves not only not representative of other people and they don't translate very well, but they also tend to be like with the PPC, which is kind of funny how much we can compare those two parties, is that there's a lot of purity testing inside the Liberal Party these days. Again, I think that the I stand with Trudeau, if you know who Vicky Campbell is on Twitter, when those people have the mentality that like these are the type of people who end up being self-destructive, when Muslim voters start to sort of chafe against the Liberal Party's undermining of parental rights or basically standing against parental rights, that you have these like urban progressives go after these people as somehow being bigoted and far right, basically just voting away 10% of the Muslim vote to the Conservatives in the next election because they legitimately think, or the party has sort of learned poorly from the last few elections, that ideological purity is what was winning them races, because they think that, well, we beat O'Toole because he was too right wing and we were more progressive and nice or whatever, and that's why we won. It's like, no, it's actually because O'Toole was impure in his own way, not because he wasn't a liberal. But they think that somehow, like, the Liberals always, or at least the Liberal base always tricks themselves into thinking that every election is determined by who is the most tolerant and nice candidate by their own metrics, not by just who speaks to voters the most. So they will end up, the funny thing is the Conservatives also end up usually learning all the wrong lessons up until Pierre Poilievre became the leader. But because Conservatives always think like, oh, we didn't moderate enough, we didn't relate to the middle voters enough. But the Liberals then also think they just didn't come over to our fringe enough, and that if we want to win elections, we're going to have to move even more towards our own fringe. And this is what's also gobbling up a lot of the NDP's votes.
Yeah, we get this kind of interesting dichotomy here, where neither, for the most part, of the main parties, or none of the three, I guess, actually seem prior to Poilievre at least, actually understood anything about what they were trying to do. It looked like, if you ever witnessed or paid attention to student politics in like your high school, for example, it looked like trying to campaign for class president with having absolutely zero understanding of how elections actually work. That's the vibe you get in the 2021 election. That's what that election was. Following 2019 and Trudeau losing Jerry Butts, he kind of lost his campaign brain. And Trudeau is great at campaigning on the personal level, going up, shaking people's hands, and being pleasant, amiable guy on an individual level. He doesn't do well with overarching plans because he doesn't apparently think about them, as his famous quote of, "I don't think about monetary policy." Not the greatest thing to say in the world for the Prime Minister. But what we see, what this causes, is the Liberals don't seem to have a coherent strategy. Same thing with O'Toole, did not have a coherent strategy on how to win voters. All the Liberals seem to be doing is doubling down on their, we need to win this narrow, tiny wedge of voter and ignore everything else. And yeah, that worked in 2019. Yeah, it worked in 2021. But I would say that it worked in spite of the strategy being bad.
Well, I think the strategy's also become too obvious. In 2015, like you were saying before, they were more so going after those like good vibe voters. And like again, you always have to, if you actually ever want to beat someone like Trudeau, you have to kind of understand why he was so popular in 2015. Like, man, I like the Conservative campaign in 2015 sucked. It basically just said vote for us because the other guys aren't that great, which is not exactly the just visiting campaign that they ran against Ignatieff in 2011. But like the whole Sunny Ways sloganeering, when you actually think about it and break it down, is kind of brilliant. Because the thing is, you're basically calling yourself progressive without having to call yourself progressive, because you're the sunny, bright guy. You know what I mean? You're the good-looking progressive guy. You're modern, and he never had to like harp on how progressive he was in the 2015 election. He more so just sort of like spoke from a vision standpoint. And and based on the fact that he no longer has Butts around, I think we could probably like you're saying, probably say that Trudeau lost his campaign brain, because he's almost very ham-handed in the new elections of trying to very much state how progressive he is in such a way that a liberal was usually smart enough to avoid, because again, you're dealing with a lot of voters, especially from immigrant communities, who actually do not want to hear how progressive you are and how appealing you are to 37-year-old women who shop at Safeway and buy their coffee at Starbucks. So now I think that's where he's very much floundering, and with Katie Telford now at the helm in terms of the strategy, everything is just so like, it's like watching a drunk man trying to like be stealthy, in the sense that everything's so obvious and they think that they're like really slipping something by you, especially with all the abortion stuff. Whenever the Conservative Party does the most minor protection for pregnant women or children, and like for unborn children, immediately it turns into, well, they're trying to attack women. And I think a lot of even their own liberal base, even if they agree with the Liberals on that issue, they're like, this doesn't feel like the win that we think it is. That we're going after the Conservatives for protecting pregnant women, and we're considering this like anti-abortion.
What it seems like in general is darn, I just lost my train of thought immediately. Fail.
I have that effect on people. Sorry, because I tend to ramble and go through a few different. I go through a few different thoughts as I'm talking.
What?
But it's basically, my point is like, you shouldn't be messaging on an issue. You should be messaging on feel and a vision. And this is where Poilievre is doing so much better of a job. He's messaging on a mindset.
You jogged my memory there on my train of thought. So what the Liberals are doing right now, federally, is exactly the same mistake Notley just made in Alberta. And that particular mistake is, what you wanted, so how you win, broadly speaking, an election is you have an appealing message to your core thing, your core party brand. So for the Conservatives, it's cost of living, crime. That's the core party brand. You want to appeal to that. If you can do that, you're probably going to do fine. Liberals, it's like it's a bit more complicated, but basically it's like redistributing wealth kind of thing, but like more nuanced than that. Obviously, they're not socialists.
Yeah, like we're like professional management
Yeah,
of
like
the
professional
economy.
management, that kind of stuff. You want to have that be your core thing and imply and wink and nod at your social policy. Now, you do your social things when you have power, but you don't campaign on your social things. You just do them as fait accomplis once you've won. Because the reality is, your social policies will get you donations, they will get you volunteers, they will get people supporting your party, but they will not actually get you votes in the voter booth because it makes your campaign divisive. Whereas most people don't actually really care that much about social issues, if that makes sense. They don't matter insofar as the average voter's conception. What they want is that you to be competent manager, competent government, and to do things to fix why they're voting for you. If someone's voting liberal, they want someone who's going to do deficit spending occasionally when necessary, be fiscally prudent when necessary, that kind of thing, like the Chrétien style or the Trudeau early style, but successfully do it, obviously. But what Trudeau is doing now is exactly what Notley did. She over the top punched the social issues and kind of ignored the core party brand issues, which allowed, in the case of Alberta in 2023, Smith to basically just dominate the campaign by talking about the core bread and butter issues of crime and crime and cost of living. The two things that the Conservatives have the best traction on, that voters care about, is what the NDP, what Notley allowed the election to be about. And that's what Trudeau's doing right now. He's campaigning super, super, super hard on abortion, on banning guns, on all this other social things that are very divisive and not well liked generally. If you like, people don't care enough about them to vote for them, if that makes sense.
Well, here's the only thing I would say about the 2023 Alberta election. I would say that election, and maybe you agree with this, that I don't think that was an election that Danielle Smith won. I think it's just one that Notley failed to win.
Yes.
And I think one thing is that and I think this is kind of what you're saying, but from a slightly different angle, is that she defined the race that there's big, scary conservatives out there. Danielle Smith is not trustworthy. She's crazy. Whatever, she's insane. One, that was kind of killed off by the debate because, like, they violated the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals rule that you do not push a point too far because you're going to break it through the other side. So by like calling her radical all the time, she looked fantastic when it came to the debate, even though I thought that debate performance from Danielle objectively was kind of but they made it look good by comparison. And then the NDP violated its campaign brand, which was that we are the party that you could trust. We're going to be maintaining social program spending. We're going to keep everything very moderate and calm and make sure that we're supporting people who are struggling. And then they're like, here's a corporate tax hike right at the end of the race. And it's like, well, you guys said you guys were the ones we could rely on. And now you're suddenly jumping. Like, they basically tried to do the Hillary Clinton, James Comey thing. This is a very strange example. But like James Comey basically brought up we might look more into investigating Hillary right before the election because they're like, well, then it gets out of her hair and no one's going to cry foul when we have to investigate her when she's the actual president. Whereas Notley was like, okay, well, I'm going to mention the corporate tax thing now so my approval rating doesn't plunge when I'm premier, right when I bring up my corporate tax hike. So I'll say it now so no one can technically say they were shocked. And then she didn't realize that there was not that many voters who were committed enough to voting NDP that wasn't going to sink her.
Yeah, that's kind of that is a good way to look at how I was phrasing it. But I'll just add here. What you want to do, and what Poilievre and Smith both actually successfully did, is you want to insinuate the difference on social policy without actually saying something. Now, if the other person's doing the correct thing as well, then you have to say things. You have to do what Blaine Higgs is doing and come out with a bold policy. But when your opponent is smashing, like, punch people in the face, I'm socially liberal, look at me, all you do is just not say that, and then you win by default on that issue. Everyone who doesn't like that is like, oh, Trudeau's punching me in the face, and Poilievre's looking over there disapproving of the punching in the face. I'm going to vote for Poilievre because I don't like getting punched in the face.
Well, this is where like the media considers it a big stand for Poilievre to say, "Well, I'm in favor of parental rights," to that Pakistani reporter,
Mm.
and it's like it's not really it's like the most it's not a weak stand in like a bad way, like oh he's being pathetic, but it's not that intense of a stand to take.
Mm.
But it's because the liberals are so kind of overreaching on that issue by just saying something reasonable like I think parents should be able to raise their kids. You're going to get a lot of people who are even in the middle saying well, yeah, I think that's better than the guy who won't stop talking about how schools need to protect children and like basically acting like a paranoid conspiracy theorist on this issue. And
Hmm.
that's the funny thing with all the media trying to go after Polya for the conspiracy angle for just merely criticizing the WEF. But like a lot of the liberal campaigning, especially from the media, uh, always seems far more conspiratorial than anything the conservatives have ever done. Every single election, and I think this is a strategy that's weakening over time because it's always kind of like this bait and switch. Every single election, the campaign is how crazy the conservatives are, and they're all secretly far right. Even O'Toole is somehow secretly far right, and like it's effectively saying that all these conservatives are actually secretly going to push your grandmother down the stairs as soon as they're elected, which is a far more conspiracy based approach to politics than the conservatives are ever engaging in. And I think that people have been trained to sort of like, I think people keep getting told that the conservatives radical under the surface, that regardless of what Poilievre is like, I think they've just used it 3 times in a row at this point, and it's just not working anymore.
Well, we kind of saw that as well in Alberta this year because Smith, anyone who knows any single fact about Danielle Smith as a human being knows she's like an arch libertarian. She's
This is where I was her biggest critic in the leadership election because I'm like pointing at all of her very, very, very not even socially liberal, like frankly left wing social positions she takes. Yet she's still far right, and I don't think most people bought it after a while.
and the problem is if you start portraying everybody against you as far right, people don't care anymore. And I don't think we even have anyone who's far right in any meaningful sense of the term in Canada who's getting advantage from that. But what it does is, yeah, O'Toole's far right, Daniel Smith's far right, Scheer's far right, Harper's far right. People just tune that out and they just look at your messaging of Pierre's far right and they're just like, well, I don't give a shit.
Yeah, and it's like especially with the question at the PEI gas station. It's like this is the way I always describe it. It's just it's like it's so desperate and sweaty these questions that you can do like the person asking it doesn't sound like they believe themselves. Like even like
Mm-hmm.
when all Polyev had to say is like by whom when they're asking him like when he's like asking like hey who's calling me far right or who's calling me like in trying to like dog whistle and the lady's voice immediately starts becoming shaky because I don't think anyone's ever asked them that question to be able to justify it because they've gotten very used to people kind of like bending over and sort of like lying down on this one that if you're accused of being far right you're immediately going to apologize. And I think that a lot of Canadians have been trained to think that if you accuse them of it, they're basically going to fold and like immediately like admit that they've somehow done something wrong and they'll do better in the future. So by not accepting that, you're going to get a lot of people who might have been able to be susceptible to the media narrative, thinking like, oh wait, there's an actual like there's an actual like question to whether he's far right. The guy's not just going to like accept it.
That's basically why O'Toole lost in 2021. Like now, I don't think, especially because if you've ever followed Brian Burgett on Twitter, he's actually dived into a lot of this in some exit polling. It doesn't look like he was ever actually going to win O'Toole. The polling looked like it was quote unquote erroneous, which is expected. That should happen every now and then in like the early days of September when he was leading. But the big issue that really sealed O'Toole's capacity to win 2021 is that media were trying to portray him, specifically on his gun issue, that he was like some far right US NRA activist trying to bring in school shootings to Canada. And he immediately folded on the gun file, which legitimizes the media framing. You've legitimized the attack against you by giving up your position that you've already staked for 4 weeks. And it's just the
And
most crazy thing to do. Why are you doing that? Why did you put that in your platform if you're not going to defend it?
And that's the thing is that I think that they and like it's almost hard to believe that that they actually did believe this themselves is that they thought if they took the right combination of media friendly positions that the media was going to turn this into a race of well which one do you like better O'Toole or Trudeau, look at their platforms, look at all the interesting things that they're proposing. It's just never how it was going to work. O'Toole technically had the worst version of the carbon tax running in 2021. Like somehow the Green Party had the best carbon tax because they had everyone else's carbon tax minus it affecting farmers. So they were just going to have it not apply to farms or agriculture at all, which is somehow the best policy. O'Toole's was like this weird thing where at the pump you'd have like to scan your like O'Toole card and then you'd get like O'Toole bucks back so you could buy like a solar panel or something one day. It was like it's like a grocery store like a marketing gimmick that you can get you can get points back so you can maybe get like a stale like a sleeve of brownies or something like that. It's like what? This is the worst policy I've ever seen. Like he seemed like a used car salesman when he was doing this. At the same time, he had like no grit at all. And at the end of the day, your base is always going to like a leader who actually has grit. This is effectively the way Donald Trump stays extremely popular because he doesn't seem like someone who really gives a crap about what the media thinks or what the opposition side thinks.
Mhm.
Whereas the conservative leaders over the past like over like O'Toole and Scheer desperately cared about what liberal voters thought. And so like why are you as conservative going to show up for the candidate who seems to care more about what everyone else thinks than what you think?
And I think the comparison to Trump, not necessarily on how people act, but in how that kind of behavior can be very successful for you politically, is quite apt. Because obviously, anyone watching this is probably well aware that Trump has 4 different indictments against him of many different charges. And all of a sudden has made him more popular. Period. He's just more popular now than he was before those indictments, both among Republicans and independents. People like him more. Why? Well, because he didn't accept the indictments. Trump's training in his sorry, not his training, his framing his entire time is the media hates him. And the government hates him. And the government hates you. So the government and the media are trying to kill him through indictments, destroy his career. That validates Trump's rhetoric. If he folded and said, yeah, I'm guilty, sorry guys, Trump would have been done instantly. His
Or even if he just didn't look like like honestly the photo that he did for the mugshot was perfect because in just an image it kind of portrayed the fact that he's determined to win and that
Mhm.
he's not accepting this. So people are trying to do this crap and you can always see it on community notes on Twitter that Trump technically did surrender because his like post on Twitter said never surrender. He technically did surrender at the Fulton County Jail on August 23rd. It's like shut up. No, he didn't really in any spirit did he actually did he actually surrender. But this is the thing with Polyev and this is why that so many people on the left both on social media trolls as well as actual legitimate quote unquote journalists and commentators are trying to draw this Polyev comparison because it's so unheard of in Canada. It's just to just like not accept the media, like just to basically like reject them completely. And this is where Polyev, I've actually heard during the leadership race, he was like the first guy in Canada to ever to win an election purely based off of social media. The vast majority of membership sales came through social media profile links. And I heard that during the entire time whenever he's making videos, and I believe he's still doing it now. He kind of let the Conservative Party manage him for a little bit, and I think he went back to his own sort of micro, smaller team. Is that he devised and shot the videos with like 2 other guys. It was like him and 2 other guys who planned the videos, scripted them, and filmed them because he's not kind of going with the sort of stage managed, hyper focus grouped way of doing things. And from simply doing that, that's what's making the left go crazy and try and compare him to Donald Trump. And I think that's what's actually turning off voters in Canada is that when you start trying to compare Pierre Poilievre to Donald Trump based on surface level comparisons like he doesn't like the media, is making a lot of people think, oh wow, the Liberal Party has gotten a little weird these days. That the fact that they
Mhm.
consider a man just not agreeing that he's a terrible person is like far right these days.
I think that's a very good point on how he's been doing the videos as well. And I think that's why both the videos and the social media is why Poilievre is so capable of saying screw you to the media. Because he is aware, his team, his core team, himself, his wife, they're all aware you don't actually need CTV's cable news to get your message across. He doesn't need that. All of the voters he's gaining here, as we see here by age group, the 30 to 44s and the 18 to 29s, which are amazingly high numbers for conservatives, he's getting these voters by social media interactions. That's how he's doing so well with these particular voters. And he doesn't need the media for that. He has Twitter, he has YouTube, he has all these other social media platforms. Facebook is another one that he's quite big on. That he communicates directly with voters through that. And he's one of the first politicians in Canada to grasp the important thing about internet messaging. Not just for influencers or people running small businesses like myself or Wyatt here. But it's really important with politicians is that authenticity on the internet is everything. There's 1 billion people who use the internet, probably even 2 billion people actually. A lot of them are grifters, a lot of them are bots, a lot of them are just lying to your face. The only reason why you use or regularly engage with content of somebody is because they are authentic to you. The overly managed, overly micro-detailed policy things that a committee will come up with are not going to ring true and are going to ring hollow on the internet. Now, if you're talking about like a more produced TV show, like something like The Daily Wire, that can go something a bit better. But if you're talking about a political person, you do need to be more raw, more off the cuff, a little less polished. Not on purpose, but just that's how it... To make good internet content, that's how you have to be.
Well, even in the case of like something like the Daily Wire and sort of like media that you can have to be a little bit more stage managed. Usually, the most popular media figures are people who started off fairly raw. Like Ben Shapiro got famous off of like Seattle radio and like very small like kind of bit parts like on trio radio shows in California. Mm-hmm. Is that stuff then translated? You have to basically you basically have to earn the ability to be polished. And like sort of preened and stage managed. Whereas the thing is that when you start off base level, Aaron O'Toole and Andrew Scheer are being told what to say, how to walk in this video. We got it back from our focus group and they want you to wear this color and stuff like that. And it's like when you're always waiting for someone's permission to be able to say something or do something, when a media figure comes up to you and say, why are you in league with far right Nazis? Your immediate reaction is not to say, screw you, what are you talking about? Because like you don't even talk to your own staff that way. That you basically ask them for permission. You basically ask permission to the media to say, am I allowed to have a get out jail free card on this one? Can you give me an off ramp? And that's effectively what O'Toole and Scheer always did, is that they don't, not like literally in their words, but they beg with their own actions on, can you give me an off ramp in a way of you not calling me this anymore? Whereas when Poilievre is shooting his own content and he's figuring out what people actually want to hear, he's the one in the driver's seat. So when someone comes up to him with a terrible question, he's not in the mentality of, well, how do I appeal to this person to stop being so mean to me? It's just immediately like, no, I'm just not going to accept the premise.
I think it's a very good, very valid point, and something that's really important and also kind of rings true with the internet generation, the people who grew up with the internet here, is on the internet, if someone's being a troll or being an asshole to you, you can just leave. So just begging for forgiveness from someone comes off as extremely hollow to someone who grew up on the internet. If someone's being an absolute troll on Twitter, I just block them. I don't listen to them anymore. They're gone. They're dead to me.
It actually thing too. Sorry. When you keep responding, there's more material for the media to cover. The more you talk about it, that they can't just say, "Oh, it's been 5 days since Poilievre hasn't responded to the accusation he's a conspiracy theorist." Everyone's gonna say, what the hell am I reading? Well, what do I care if he didn't respond to that stupid question?
And what this means for like someone like Poilievre is, by refusing the question, that actually rings off as more authentic to young people, because they're so used to just being able to refuse the conversation with someone. Whether it's good or bad, we can go into. There's a lot of nitty gritty on social aspects of that. But the reality is, anyone under the age of 40 who's grown up with the internet is so used to the idea that, oh, someone's being a dick, they're gone. I'm never seeing them again.
You are correct. All the people I see on social media saying, "Why isn't Poilievre answering the question?" It's always like the most out of touch, like boomerish people. Like their profile photo is like a half shot of their face because they couldn't line up the camera right.
Mhm.
I like don't you just gotta you like anyone can create some noise on social media and you don't need to respond to it. So if everyone's suddenly saying Poilievre's Trump or whatever and there's some hashtag trending or whatever, say nothing. Who cares? They can't do anything about it. Like at the end of the day, people are always going to like you for being confident more
Mhm.
than like you for agreeing with them. That this is where, to a certain extent, Trump can win a lot of. This is where I think this is where he won way more black voters than he did in 2016 and when he re-ran in 2020. And this is why he also won more black voters than any Republican had since like George H.W. Bush or Reagan. Is because he had the right attitude to win those voters.
Mm. And just to circle back from to
And maybe we'll end it after the circle back too.
yes, yes, I think that'd be
I gotta,
perfect.
I gotta go clean a garage in a second here.
So that just my one circle back here before we end up. The confidence that Poilievre has is because he's not stage managed. And you kind of touched on this a bit, but I want to add to it. One, O'Toole or Scheer or anyone else you want to pick is listening to someone else and listening to feedback, listening to focus groups more than they need to. Like focus groups aren't necessarily a bad thing, but you need to use them properly. And most people don't use them, but I'm not. It's way out of scope to talk about how to use them properly. It might be a future thing. But the specifics, why do you want Scheer to be prime minister? Because that's what you're voting on effectively in Canada. You're voting on the prime minister because the actual legislature doesn't do anything. The prime minister basically does everything. Why do you want Scheer to be prime minister? Because you think Scheer's going to be a good leader. Okay. Well, if a good leader is not someone who's going to get flapped by a question, is going to look for approval of their manager or the media to answer something. A good leader is someone who just does what they think is right. Now, doing what you think is right, if you have bad instincts, can sink your career. But at the same token, if you don't do what you think is right and you overly manage yourself, you've also sunk your career because no one cares about you. No one trusts you. No one wants you to be leader. It's
They also don't want it to be an absolute military campaign
mm-hmm.
in order to give the person the right data to be able to show them that this is the right thing to do in order to make sure that they make the right decision. Because that was the problem with O'Toole is that I had a lot of people who were conservative saying we should still vote for him anyways because he's still going to be better than Trudeau. Like one, it hurts the culture of the Conservative Party that this is what we consider a prime minister from the Conservative Party, and two, to get him to do anything good, are you going to be there at the convention every year? Are you going to be there calling your MP and making sure they do the right thing? Because unless you're signed up to basically make this a full-time job to make sure that a weakling like him stands strong, it's not going to happen. And all the people, the funny thing is, all the people advocating O'Toole were all the people who never knock on a door. They're the people who basically just want to say, "Be lazy and vote for O'Toole. Don't think about it."
Yep. Now, but with that though, I think we should wrap up here for the day. Do you have any final things you want to say out before I cut the recording here?
If anyone's in the Calgary area, they can sign up for the National Telegraph's emails and on the website, thenationaltelegraph.com. And if you're on our email list, we might be releasing early bird tickets to the Ben Shapiro event in Southwest Calgary. So if you want to be able to, jump on that opportunity, that's great there. Also, you can follow me over at the National Telegraph's YouTube page, as well as Wyatt Claypool on Twitter, or X, I guess it's called these days. And I'd love to come back on some other time in the future. I do really like talking about politics and this sort of microscopic communications and polling sort of perspective.
Yeah, everyone in the comments below, let me know what you think of stuff like that. If people like this kind of things, we can probably do more of them. If everyone hates this and you throw tomatoes at me metaphorically, I'll keep that in mind too. But otherwise, you make sure to do all those YouTube things. Share it, like the video, all those things. It's all appreciated. And with that, I will sign off here, and we will see you guys sometime in the future, hopefully.